These last couple of studies haven't really been shared in any detail before now, which means I'm getting to the part where my notes get messy. So I don't know how long this will take or if we'll end sooner. There's a couple of points I want to tie together and a stack of quotes that I can't find. So I just want to summarize, but there's a couple of other things that I want us to introduce to this concept. Just to summarize, we saw that 1863 takes us to 2014. But 2014 has a special symbol associated with it, that it's midway, midnight in the parable of the 10 virgins, or midway. So 2014 brings us to 1863. We can bring this symbol of midway and see it's midway through the Civil War. And that's one example. But when we take these histories and bring them into 2014, 2014 is consistently the midway point. French Revolution, Civil War, or in less structured histories, you still see the same pattern. 1861, there's a crisis in the nation. Two streams of information. Both recognize the nation is under the judgment of God. You could say they both have that same document, but they're reading it differently. One sees that the judgment is because of slavery and it's the churches God is angry with. The other is the churches, and they say that it's because the nation is not Christian from the government down through the schools and because of immorality. 1863 has seen the Democrats winning. There's a turning point at the Battle of Gettysburg. And at the Battle of Gettysburg, Abraham Lincoln introduces this phrase, under God, into the Pledge of Allegiance. In 1861, at the beginning, the Protestant churches begin to call for a religious inscription on the coins. This hasn't been successful in times past. In 1863, In God We Trust is decided as that religious inscription. At the same time, the National Reform Movement. And they're forming because they're losing the Civil War and they're afraid. 1864, we see it become stamped. 1865, an Act of Congress. They make that much more firm. They're introducing new coins. They want it stamped on every coin that will allow room for the inscription. This comes under our history. This brings in the issues of the Civil War, the judgment of God, the issue of race and slavery. 1868 also takes us to 2019, and you have the issue now of male pronouns. It's also, when we go to those histories and make application, the first presidential impeachment of two. Then we go to the 63 years and we find a similar scenario. Here it's the North that's wanting to say God is on our side against the South. In this history, it's the United States that wants to say that God is on our side. It's those godless communists that we need to fear, and God won't protect us from them unless we demonstrate that we're a God-fearing nation. 1948, this phrase, under God, it's picked up from Lincoln's speech, and it's introduced into the Society of the Sons and the Daughters of the American Revolution. The Knights of Columbus, they take this concept and they make it official through their organization nationwide, and then they start to write to the President and the Vice President and the House of Representatives. And they're credited in 1954 as having been the chief authors of this work. In 1954, it's added to the Pledge of Allegiance. It's Lincoln's birthday. They're at Lincoln's church, sitting on Lincoln's pews, and the pastor speaking to President Eisenhower, who's in the audience, that they need to recognize their allegiance to the nation under God. He's saying that Pledge of Allegiance could belong to any nation. We have to be special. And what makes us special is our Christianity. 1954, it's added. 1956 is the 63 that takes you to 2019. In God We Trust becomes the official motto of the United States. Instead of out of many one. Out of many one is perfect. we come into our history. 9/11, In God We Trust, begins to be placed in public schools in Mississippi. We're going to see that it just begins here. It's now a controversy that perhaps we don't realize it. What's happening right now from 2000, particularly from 2016, 17, 18, we're in the center of a hurricane and we don't even know it. I don't know who here has heard of Project Blitz. Project Blitz. We're in the center of a hurricane. Project Blitz is an organization formed by the Christian Nationals, the religious right. They've formed an organization that is specifically named after Hitler's Blitzkrieg. Specifically named from that they're going to make the United States a Christian nation so hard and so fast no one notices. And it's working. And they've done that in 2017, 2018, and it started to leak out. Their whole playbook leaked, and you can actually see their whole battle plan. This is modeled after the Blitzkrieg, and it's working. And it starts with introducing In God We Trust into schools. So what happened in 2001 becomes much more relevant in our history. State by state, they've started making it so that schools must, public schools, government-run schools must display In God We Trust in every classroom, dormitory, cafeteria, everywhere. They want these phrases displayed. It takes off much more, this phrase, after 9/11, when there's a call to just print it on your home printer and put it in your windows, in the windows of your car, everywhere you can. And again, we read all of those leaders who said that this nation is under the judgment of God because we've removed Christianity from our schools because of immorality. And again, we see conspiracy theories come into it. They would say that it's the judgment of God when there's school shootings. Why?
Serves their purpose.
Serves their purpose. Because there's no religious teaching in schools. There isn't allowed Bible teaching in schools and public prayer in schools. So they say because we cannot have school prayer, we cannot expect God to protect our schools. And then they say these national disasters, it's because of gay pride marches. So they're forgetting the fact that it's guns, because they're usually connected with the right, and the right is pro-gun. They won't acknowledge guns, its role in school shootings. They won't acknowledge climate change in hurricanes. It's the judgment of God as well. They won't, because they don't acknowledge global warming. They're refusing to acknowledge science. Their conspiracy theories allow them to do this. And instead they see it as God's judgment. So do we believe that the United States has filled its cup? Yes. What we're trying to understand is what filled that cup. Why is the United States under the judgment of God? And I don't believe that God sent Islam, that he took down those towers in the way that they do. I believe that he's removed his protection to a certain extent. He's removing his protection. And he has to. But we have to understand why. And it can't be whatever this stream is saying. Because Ellen White is in direct, she says that God is angry at slavery, but he's particularly angry at the Protestant churches because it's them out of anyone that should have known better. And out down in this history, who should have been on the right side of the civil rights movement more than anyone else? The churches. So who is God most angry at? The churches. So we brought that down into our history. 2014, Obama's winning. You can make the application that the nation is on course. He sees the nation as out of many one. Out of many, you could say out of many genders, there's a few now. But out of whatever the colour of your skin, whatever your gender, your religious belief, your party affiliation, it's a nation that's welcoming. It's a liberal society, following Brother Tyler's presentation. So he refuses to say under God when he recites the Pledge of Allegiance to mark the 150-year anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, and he refuses to say in God we trust as the national motto. And there's stories of he would go to universities and speak, and they would have Bible verses or phrases like in God we trust in massive signs or like metal slogans on the sides of like behind him when he's speaking, and what would he make them do before he'd be taped? Had to be covered. They said he waged a war on religion. I don't think he did. I think he waged a war on church and state. This is what this presidency of Obama, it mobilizes the religious right in a way that nothing ever had before. And it's particularly 2014 when they lost the election. There's studies done on 2014 that show the work of Bannon and Cambridge Analytica, the Republican donors, the Mercers, they're all coming together. But we also read those phrases where that lady, Lee, can't remember her last name, she said that the separation of church and state would be the death of the nation. She's one of the leaders behind Project Blitz, which we're going to discuss in a moment. There's this movement forming, Make America Great Again. I want us to see this national reform movement. When was it formed? It is, but it isn't. I'll find the quote. The national reform movement. In 1863 they come together. I haven't. The organisation, the National Reform Association, it attained the status of a permanent organisation January of 1864. So they start forming it in 1863, but is it formed here? It's formed here. It's formalised. I want to suggest that the formalisation is 2016. It's between 1863 and 65. So between 2014 and 2019, this is just the coming together. This is when they start to combine forces and come together. But it's not until 1864 it obtains the status of a formal organisation. So in 2014 they start to come together. Make America Great Again, Donald Trump doesn't, I'm not sure if he attempts or does trademark that phrase. He does that in 2015, voted in 2016. I just want us to see that this movement was a period of time. And in our history, it begins to come together in 2014, but it's formalised 15 and properly 16 with the election. That quote, Permanent Organisation 1864, is by A.T. Jones, February 1, 1990, The American Sentinel. So 2014, they start this work to bring the nation back to God. Then we went back and saw where all of this stemmed from. And it was 1979, the moral majority and Jerry Falwell, and what mobilised the right and brought them together. Yes, it's that conflict with the IRS, and what's the underlying issue? Taxation? Why? They want to stay racist. If we were to draw one line long enough to go from 1798 to 2019, I think we can see how we can cut bits up and make application. We can see how this history is repeating, but you can also see how nothing changes. And what did we say yesterday? We said yesterday, slavery, did that issue ever go away? No. And the other issue, what was the other one that never left? Colonialism. Those issues are never dealt with. So it's the same now. You can see that whether you go from 1798 to... By the way, what legislation was put out in 1798? The very start, what did they do? The internet's not working, I might leave that one. If it works, we'll bring it up. But that issue that began in 1798, there's an issue over slavery that isn't dealt with. It goes through the Civil War, it's not dealt with. They had 63 years to deal with it before what? Before their cup was full. And then that was not dealt with. It comes into the history of the civil rights movement. The churches won't deal with it, and this is what causes them to come together at the end of the world. It's the same issues that are consistently not dealt with. And we also saw gender. We saw what they're actually teaching in the White House, those evangelicals, that it has to be a male Cyrus. No internet. Yes?
Can we all get off the network? We're trying to zoom in when it's crashed.
Oh.
We can get off our devices
Okay.
for the network. Okay, go ahead.
So we see that this brings about the moral majority, 1979. It's because of their schools. Jerry Falwell has a particular school, Liberty University. And what are they arguing? What's the foundation for their belief that they should be able to segregate? They have the right to because they see it in the Bible. So they are using the same Constitution, the same documents. Their first win is Ronald Reagan. 1989, he says, mission accomplished. And he's right, it's the beginning of our reform line. And once you get to this history, it's just a cascade of events, it's unavoidable. The same man, he attacked Jimmy Carter in this history, he attacked Clinton in this history. They're consistently trying to maintain their influence over politics. 9/11. The two streams. Mississippi begins In God We Trust. They're losing under Obama. This movement begins Make America Great Again. 2015, Trump trademarks it. 2016, he wins with 81% of the evangelical white vote. And it's Jerry Falwell and Jerry Falwell Jr. through this history that have particularly led that cause. I want us now to consider Project Blitz. Project Blitz began in 2016, but it began in quiet or secret. This is the work of Project Blitz. They began in 2016. They took their name from the Blitzkrieg, meaning that they want to act violently and quickly in such a fashion that that it will all happen before people can stop it. In 2017, they had something called, and they named this the Project Blitz Playbook. Sent out to the evangelical leaders, those who are part of this, to try and break down exactly how they wanted to reform their nation. And it comes in 3 steps. They've got 3 steps by which they want to do this. The very first one, introduce In God We Trust into public schools. The same thing that began at 9/11. They want it nationwide. And they say that the first steps look innocent. And they want the first steps to look innocent so that they're too far down the line to stop it once people wake up. Display our national motto in public buildings, on license plates, on the side of police cars. This is category 1, that they want to introduce Bible teaching just at the start, just kind of offer some Bible teaching into public schools. They want to start bringing into the school a uniform, sound, distinct and appropriate presentation of the role of religion in the history of the US Constitution, in the history of the United States. They want to bring in God we trust into courthouses, state houses, local buildings, or government-operated organisations. They want to allow Bible literacy, to allow the teaching of the Bible as an elective course in public schools. What does A.T. Jones say about Bible teaching in public schools? It's church and state. He says, can you have any Bible teaching or any Bible reading in a public school? No. He says the United States government had no religion, has never had any religion. It is forbidden to have a religion by the Constitution. So when they want to bring into the schools a teaching that shows the role of religion in the history of the beginning of the United States and the construction of the Constitution, what are they trying to do? Reform history. Category 2. All of these are bills that they're sending to their state governments. They're beginning at that level, and they're just flooding their state governments and their legislatures with bills. Category 2. Resolutions and proclamations recognising the importance of religious history and freedom, to create a Religious Freedom Day. Proclamation recognising Christian Heritage Week. Proclamation recognising the importance of the Bible in history. All of these different things they start listing. And they also want specific days to commemorate by the history, Christian history. And the step 3, what's step 3? Religious liberty protection legislation. That word protection should be the first thing that grabs us. They want to protect their own religious liberty. And how are they going to do that? They want the government to put out resolution statements saying that the government will not support homosexual couples, that it's the public policy of the state that will only encourage marriage between a man and a woman, that they will only allow the maintenance of someone's birth gender, that will only allow the recognition of someone's birth gender in any way, that will only allow adoption by a man and a woman couple, no adoption by same-sex couples, protection for those who wish to discriminate. So in this history, what's the problem? They want to discriminate and they're not allowed. What they're trying to bring in with step 3 is protection, that they can discriminate. But then what they want to bring in with these bills is, at the state level to begin with, they want it declared. It's about marriage. It's about all of these issues that Obama was being attacked for, his handling of them. That's step 3. I want to quote here. America's Christian nationalists have a new plan for advancing their legislative goals in state capitals across the country. Its stated aim is to promote religious freedom. Not shy, they call it Project Blitz. Blitz accurately describes the spirit of the enterprise, but the mission has little to do with what most Americans would call religious freedom. This is just the latest attempt by religious extremists to use the hardest powers of government to secure a privileged position in society for their version of Christianity. In their guidebook for state legislatures and other allies, the authors of the Project Blitz program have grouped their model legislation into 3 categories according to how difficult they anticipate the passage. So easy, harder, hardest. Begin with the easy. The first category is symbolic. Symbolic gestures like "In God we trust" on as many moving objects as possible, police cars, school buses. Critics of such symbolic gestures often argue that they act as gateways to more extensive forms of state involvement in religion. It turns out that the Christian right agrees with them. Mr. Barton says, he's one of the men behind Project Blitz, they're going to be things that people yell at, but these things will help move the ball down the court. The second most difficult category for Project Blitz consists of bills intended to promote the teaching and celebration of Christianity in public schools and elsewhere. These bills are a means of spreading the message that Christian conservatives are the real Americans. It's a Jewish Christian West. Same message as Steve Bannon. The third step, the third and most contentious, is what they speak of as the Mississippi Missile. They're going back to these days, the Mississippi Missile. The missile in question is Mississippi's HB 1523, same state, different law. 2016 law that allows private businesses and government employees to discriminate based on LGBT people, for example, provided that they do so in accordance with sincerely held religious beliefs. The bill offers extraordinary protections, not to all religious beliefs, but to a very narrow set of beliefs associated mostly with conservative religion. Their aim, in their language, is political power. It's sometimes called dominion, meaning specifically the domination by those with a correct biblical worldview over all aspects of politics, culture, and society. David Barton, we quoted him before, is the founder of Wall Builders. Wall Builders is the site I went to read all the long list of ways that Obama waged a war on Christianity. He kept a list of all the things that Obama did that he hated. David Barton, the founder of Wall Builders, an organization that promotes the view that America is a nation of, by, and for Christians of a very specific variety. Buddy Pilgrim, another member of the Project Blitz steering team, is a businessman who founded Integrity Leadership, a ministry focused on equipping Christians with biblical principles for the workplace. According to Mr. Pilgrim's website, quoting, "Dominion in earthly realms of authority, business and politics is a biblical mandate." What did he just say? It's our biblical mandate to have dominion in all realms of earthly authority, business and political. Church and state. Another man, no, this is the same man, he offered a neat summary of his political philosophy. He stated, quote, "There is not a place in the universe where Christ does not shout, 'Mine.'" What did the Catholic Church do? The Catholic Church said that there is not an area of the earth where Christ doesn't shout, "Mine," but what did they say? We're the ones to decide where and what that looks like and how to administer that politically. They're doing the same thing. Lee Carawan, that's the same lady that we quoted before, saying she's the same one that said that the separation of church and state would be the end of the United States. She speaks of how upbeat this crowd is that's behind Project Blitz. She says, "We have this window of opportunity. I think we're all feeling it." She says, "This is just the beginning." She's the executive director of the Congressional Prayer Caucus Foundation. A fourth member, I think there's four of them that particularly steer this. If the left stream of information has article after article detailing this. That you go into New York Times, Washington Post, they're all speaking about the Project Blitz and the coming together of church and state. This one particularly is from The Guardian. "The emboldened religious right has unleashed a wave of legislation across the United States since Donald Trump became president. They began at 2016. Same way NRA, they began it after 1863, formalised in 1864. A playbook known as Project Blitz, developed by a collection of Christian groups, has provided state politicians with a set of off-the-shelf pro-Christian model bills. These model bills were created by the Congressional Prayer Caucus Foundation, CPCF, set up by former Republican congressman, which has a stated aim to protect religious freedom and preserve America's Jewish Christian heritage. One of the steering team behind Project Blitz is David Barton, the Texas-based founder of War Builders, which takes its inspiration from the Old Testament in describing a mission of, quote, rebuilding our nation's foundations. So what do they believe they're doing? War Builders. Making America great again, but where are they going back to make it great again? They're saying they're going back to the foundations of the nation. 2019, January 28, Donald Trump tweets. What does he tweet? He says, numerous states are introducing Bible literacy classes, giving the students the option of studying the Bible. And then he tweets, starting to make a turn back. Great. Where is he wanting to go back to? To a place that isn't there, to the nation's foundations. But what he wants is, this is in response, and by the way, I also want to know that when he tweets this, what show is he watching? Where's he getting his news from? Fox. Fox and Friends their morning show was just issuing a segment about the Bible literacy bills that are flooding the states, and how numerous states are introducing these Bible classes, and it's all positive. And how does Trump respond? This is what it looks like to make America great again. They're bringing it back to its Jewish Christian foundation. This is what he means when he says make America great again. It's the exact work of Project Blitz. If you want one of the best sources on this, on what Project Blitz are doing, because I don't have all the quotes and references for exactly how they want to bring this about. It's more complicated than this. They want to go back to their idea of the family. That comes down to gender and women's submission. They want to go back to its race, because they want to control who comes and who comes into the country. It's all about race. It's the exact same mentality that those who are on the wrong side attack the Muslims for. Why don't they want abortion? They actually say we need to outbreed the left. We need to outbreed the Muslims. Hitler did that in World War II. Mussolini did that in World War II. The whole idea was controlling a woman's body and making her have more babies, because that's how they wanted to make sure they outbred their enemies. The Catholic Church, the same one. Why not support any form of birth control? They want Catholics to have more babies. The bigger you are, the more power. It's the same mentality, but they have this 3-step playbook, and they're going a long way, like their name says. I want us to see how far we are into Sunday law. The final events will be rapid ones, but they're already happening. It's not something we can look to the future and wait to see. I want us to consider one thing. And what did we say is one of the biggest difficulties for people in the church when they hear what we're teaching, or for people in this movement who don't quite realize what we're teaching? What's the biggest problem they have? Same documents, Constitution. It's the interpretation, it's how we read it. If you were to go to early writings. If you have if you have the Ellen White app on your device, I would go into books Click the plus arrow, see the list of books listed. Go down to early writings, click that box. Then click spiritual gifts. Can anyone see chapter titles? Spiritual gifts, when is it written? Early on, does anyone know the year? Does anyone know the year that spiritual gifts is put together? I think it was 1858, but I can't remember. It was definitely before 1860. 1858, you're willing to back me on that? Spiritual gifts, 1858. So is this before or after the Civil War? I want to make a suggestion. We went back and we saw Millerite history. What was Millerite history? You have 1844. When was Christ meant to come back? So 1844, Christ is meant to come back. 1858, all this book, Spiritual Gifts, is put together. What's its purpose? What's about to happen? What was meant to happen? The second advent is meant to happen. So I want to suggest this is put together to prepare people. What this is the very beginning of the Great Controversy. It's like the original draft of the original draft. And then this is reformed into the Great Controversy. What's the first chapter? The fall of Satan. What's the last chapter? So it starts with the fall of Satan. And then it progresses down. The fall of man, the plan of salvation, the first advent of Christ, the ministry of Christ, the transfiguration, the betrayal of Christ. It goes through all that history. Paul visits Jerusalem, the great apostasy, the Reformation, the church and the world united. And then, William Miller. What history has she reached? 1798 Millerite history. William Miller. The first angel's message, what history? Second angel's message. The Advent movement illustrated. Another illustration. All Millerite history. The sanctuary. Where is she in the sanctuary? October 22. 1844, when Christ moves from the holy to the most holy. The third angel's message, a firm platform, spiritualism, covetousness. Where is she in covetousness? What is covetousness? Laodicea. Where do we mark Laodicea? We mark it from 1850 for their time. So you can see she's gone all the way down, 1798, she's covered Millerite history multiple times. She gets to October 22, 1844, then she gets to covetousness, 1850. And then where? The shaking. And then where? The sins of Babylon. What's after the sins of Babylon? The loud cry. And then? If you were to put these on a reform line, where would you place them? We've seen the shaking. This gives us a clue. The loud cry. Where is the loud cry? If we were to draw a reform line and we were to see the loud cry, what's happened before the loud cry? Sunday law. What happens at Sunday law to the ship? It's destroyed. Why is it destroyed? Because its cup is full. So we have the sins of Babylon, don't we? So the sins of Babylon is what's in that cup. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And after that, the loud cry is given, and then the close of probation. Are we okay? She's laying all of this out in 1858. And this is what it's meant to look like. And then you're meant to have the second advent, 1863. In there is Jacob's time of trouble. What's Jacob's time of trouble before the second advent? Here? 1863. Stay in our history. What's Jacob's time of trouble? The Civil War. This is what their reform line should have looked like. Can we see that? Is everyone okay with that? Go to your Ellen White app and tick the boxes for the chapters. You can start from covetousness, the shaking, the sins of Babylon, the loud cry, the third message closed, the time of trouble. Tick those boxes, open your search engine for advanced query and type in Sabbath. How many times does it come up? Once. And what's the history? She's saying in here we're going to get in trouble for keeping the Sabbath. Why? Why were they getting in trouble here? The issue was the draft. If they allowed their sons to be drafted, they weren't allowed to keep the Sabbath. Take out time of trouble. Type in Sabbath. How many times does it come up? None. Type in Congress. How many times? Does it come up? No Sunday, no law, no Congress. All of this ended in failure, yes? What happens to spiritual gifts? We enter into another history when Christ was meant to come back. How many histories of failure do we have? Now you have another one, 1888. And there's meant to be a second advent, yes? She says the loud cry has already begun, the loud cry of the third angel, Revelation 18 has come down. It's all meant to be wrapped up in the 1888 history. Go to the Great Controversy. Whichever one, I'm in the 1888 version. 1911 is just repackaged, same material. I would rather you go to the 1888 version if you can. All of this that's under spiritual gifts is rewritten for the 1888 history. But it's the same material that's been expanded upon. And you can begin it. What's the first chapter called? She begins it back in the destruction of Jerusalem. She gives much more detail on that history. But it's essentially this repackaged. Persecution in the first centuries, the apostasy, Waldenses, Wycliffe, Huss and Jerome. She goes through all the history of the Dark Ages. Go down to chapter 17. Chapter 17, Heralds of the Morning. Chapter 18, An American Reformer. Who's the American Reformer? She's gone down to William Miller. William Miller, An American Reformer, Light Through Darkness, A Great Religious Awakening, A Warning Rejected, Prophecies Fulfilled. What history is she covering? 1844. Then chapter 23, what is the sanctuary? What history is that? Specifically. What is the sanctuary? It's October 22, 1844. In the Holy of Holies, God's law immutable, a work of reform, modern revivals, the investigative judgment, the origin of evil, enmity between Satan, man and Satan, agencies of evil spirits, snares of Satan, the first great deception, spiritualism. What history is she covering?
From 1888 to about 1920.
In context, she's only writing this in 1888. She can't be covering that history. 1844 to?
1888.
Are you talking the Fox sisters, are you?
Fox Sisters, all of that's coming in.
49.
So that's 1846, they were.
Where do we mark spiritualism on the reform line? Because if you went back to early writings, where's spiritualism? It's before covetousness. She's saying that's external, spiritualism is external, covetousness is internal. So if you see spiritualism, she's taking you still back to 1850. And then, after spiritualism, what's the next chapter? Character and aims of the papacy. The impending conflict, the scriptures a safeguard, the final warning. What is the final warning? The final warning is the cry under the loud cry. So what history has she covered? There's no final warning here. This has failed. She says the impending conflict, the conflict that's ahead of them.
Right.
This is a final. This was meant to be a final warning. Now she says there's going to be another final warning.
1888.
Which means that this has to be, in her history, it's after the Civil War. There has to be another crisis. Tick those chapter titles. You can start from spiritualism, character and aims of the conflict, of the papacy, the impending conflict. The scriptures are a safeguard, the final warning. I would suggest the scriptures are a safeguard, the impending conflict is the history of the Sunday law. The final warning, the time of trouble. Where is the time of trouble beginning? Jacob's time of trouble, close of probation. Second Advent. Time of trouble, God's people delivered. Tick all those boxes and type in Sunday. How many times does it come up? 26. Is it a subject in this history? It's a subject, but is it the sins of Babylon? Is there even a Sunday law in this history? In the history between 1844 and 1863, is there any Sunday law? No. What is the sins of Babylon? Go back to early writings. What time do we finish? 2:15. Go back to early writings and go to the sins of Babylon. What are they? We'll begin at the first and we're just going to paraphrase a little. I saw that since the second angel proclaimed the fall of the churches, they have been growing more and more corrupt. They bear the name of being Christ's followers, yet it is impossible to distinguish them from the world. Next paragraph. Said the angel, Satan has taken the full possession of the churches as a body. Next paragraph. The churches have been filling up with every unclean and hateful bird. Halfway through. Their sins and pride have reached unto heaven. We're in early writings 2:7-4.1. The angel says their sins have reached unto heaven. Sins and pride have reached unto heaven. How full is that? It's full. Their portion is prepared. Justice and judgment have slumbered long, but will soon awaken. Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. The fearful threatenings of the third angel are to be realized. This is her history, 1858. All the wicked are to drink of the wrath of God. An innumerable host of evil angels are spreading over the whole land and crowding the churches. These agents of Satan look upon the religious bodies with exultation, for the cloak of religion covers the greatest crime and iniquity. What is the crime and iniquity that filled their cup? Next paragraph. All heaven beholds with indignation human beings, the workmanship of God, reduced by their fellow men to the lowest depths of degradation and placed on a level with the brute creation. What is the rest of that whole chapter about? What is the sins of Babylon that were to bring about the second advent? Slavery. Anything to do with Sunday law and Congress? Absolutely nothing. Angels have recorded it all. It is written in the books of heaven. The tears of the pious bondmen and bondwomen, of fathers and mothers and children, brothers and sisters, are bottled up in heaven. God will restrain his anger but little longer. Until when? Until 1861. His wrath burns against this nation, and especially against the religious bodies that have sanctioned this terrible traffic and have themselves engaged in it. Next paragraph. These professed Christians read of the sufferings of martyrs, and tears coursed down their cheeks. They wonder that men could ever become so hardened as to practice such cruelty towards their fellow men. Yet those who think and speak thus are at the same time holding human beings in slavery. And this is not all. They sever the ties of nature and cruelly oppress their fellow men. How did they sever the ties of nature? Wife from husband, father from daughter. They're splitting families. They can inflict most inhuman torture with the same relentless cruelty manifested by papists and heathen towards Christ followers. Said the angel, it will be more tolerable for the heathen and for papists in the day of the execution of God's judgment than for such men. 1260 years of paganism and 1260 years of papalists, and you're better off a heathen or a papalist than a slave owner in the 1860s. God's anger will not cease until he has caused this land of light to drink the dregs of the cup of his fury, until he has rewarded unto Babylon double. Reward her even as she rewarded you, double unto her double, according to her works, in the cup which she hath filled. How full is the cup? It's full in 1861. The United States was only given 63 years, and if we hadn't have failed, that's all they would have had. I saw that the slave master will have to answer for the soul of his slave. The very second last sentence. She says that the slave who has become as a brute beast will be as if he had never been, while the master must endure the 7 last plagues. When on our reform line are the 7 last plagues? Before or after the second advent? Before the second advent. So how can the slave master, the slave owners in the 1850s and 60s be on earth in our history when the 7 last plagues are poured out?
Recurring history.
Christ was supposed to come back.
This is what it was meant, this whole story is what meant to have happened.
History is going to repeat. How?
History's going to repeat. But these are meant to be the 7 last plagues. And this is when the slave owners are to experience the 7 last plagues. Not in our reform line, because this whole book is written for what history? This history. And it ended in failure. She's documented what was meant to have been. Can we see that? She's skipped, if this is us, then we would say that she skipped all of this history. We would still have to say that what fills America's cup at the end of the world is slavery, and we know that isn't true. So my question is, how do we read, and how do we read consistently? Because millions of Adventists are sleeping in Sabbath every day, waiting to see a Sunday law in Congress. Why? Because they're taking the great controversy and all those quotes of Ellen White from History of Failure. And they're saying that when we see Sunday law in Congress, then we'll know that church and state are coming together. And if we are not going to take this history and say that when we see church and state come together, there's going to be southern cotton plantations, and we see black families torn apart and slavery come back, no one's saying that is the sins of Babylon's in our history. So why are we saying Sunday law in Congress is this waymark in our history? The problem isn't just that we don't see Sunday law in 2014 and somehow it's progressive. That's not how we treat our reform line. The sins of Babylon we have to see in 1979, 1989 to 91, 9/11, 2014, 2019. And if we don't see Sunday law as the issue, by the end of this year you have 2 witnesses of what that waymark looks on our reform line. And Adventism will not recognize it because they are still standing in 1888. They've entered no new reform line. I'm suggesting 2014 is not some type of progression towards a Sunday law. It is Sunday law. Our problem is we don't read consistently, and we're still taking what was written for a history of failure into a history of success. And if we want to do it for here, we have to do it for here. We can see the issue of slavery as a subject. This issue will be a subject, but it looks different. And unless you're on a reform line, and unless you have the correct methodology, it will not be identified. Adventism is never going to get the Sunday law in Congress that they're waiting for, because they're looking in 1888 history and the history of A.T. Jones and the National Reform Movement. The National Reform Movement ended. It's a new movement. It's a new Sunday law. It's a new cup that's been filled. There's one last quote I forgot that I want to read before we close. There's a reason that this subject of the Civil War, I didn't coordinate with Brother Tyler in this week's studies. There's a reason why slavery and the Civil War has come back into our prophetic understanding. Because just as much as we see the history of 1888 and A.T. Jones, our Alpha history should even more tell us what the sins of Babylon are in our time. And it's a different story than what we're expecting. And it's also a political story. There's a quote, there's 2 quotes that I just want to read to close. This is James White. He's in 1862. James White says, "For the past 10 years, the Review has taught that the United States of America was a subject of Bible prophecy, and that slavery is pointed out in the prophetic word as the darkest and most damning sin upon this nation. It was taught that heaven has wrath in store for the nation, which it would drink to the very dregs as due punishment for the sin of slavery. He's quoting his wife's work. And the anti-slavery teachings of several of our publications, based upon certain prophecies, have been such that their circulation has been positively forbidden in the slave states. Those of our people who voted at all at the last presidential election to a man voted for Abraham Lincoln. Did they vote? Some of them did. He doesn't condemn them for it, just vote for the right side. But for reasons which we will here state, our people have not taken that part in the present struggle that others have. Why didn't they? He says, we think we see. We think. I would suggest that in this subject, he's already quoted Ellen White that he's in agreement with his wife. We think we see, through the prophetic word, the continuation of slavery down to the end of all earthly governments. They believed that slavery was to be the final damning sin, the final crisis that brought about the second advent. And he goes to quote from Revelation 6, 12 to 17, where they see the sixth seal open, there's a great earthquake, the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, the moon cast forth her figs. Amid the terrors of the day of God, which closes this mortal state, bondmen as well as free men call on rocks and mountains to hide them from the presence of the Lord. And they use those passages to say that slavery was never going to end. It would end with the second advent. So 1862, James White still has that picture. This is why we need to be considering the issues of race and gender. Race takes you from the Civil War, but it quickly morphs into gender, and both are as much a subject today. We come to the very introduction of the reform line for the Nethinims, and they have to see a black president. And then when they can't stand that, who next are they supposed to vote in? A woman, and can they stand it? No. This is 1 Testimonies 533.2. It's written in 1865. When is 1865 on our reform line? When is 1865? (1865) is the end of the Civil War. It's 2019. Rochester, New York, December 25, 1865. I was shown many things concerning the people of God in connection with his work for these last days. I saw that many professed Sabbath keepers will come short of everlasting life. They fail to take warning from the course pursued by the children of Israel and fall into some of their evil ways. If they continue in these sins, they will fall like the Israelites and never enter the heavenly Canaan. Now all these things happened unto them for examples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. I saw that many would fall this side of the kingdom. God is testing and proving his people, and many will not endure the test of character. Is she talking externally to the Millerite movement or internally? So 2019, are we speaking externally or internally? There are many that would fall this side of November 9. God is testing and proving his people. Many will have close work to overcome their peculiar traits of character and be without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, unrebukable before God and man. Many professed Sabbath keepers will be no special benefit to the cause of God or the church without a thorough reformation on their part. Many Sabbath keepers are not right before God in their political views. They are not in harmony with God's word or in union with the body of Sabbath-keeping believers. Where's their problem? Their political views. They are not in harmony with God's word or in union with the body of Sabbath-keeping believers. Their views do not accord with the principles of our faith. Sufficient light has been given. Has it been given? To correct all who wish to be corrected. Does everyone want to be corrected? No. All who still retain political sentiments which are not in accordance with the Spirit of truth, are living in violation of the principles of heaven. Therefore, as long as they thus remain, they cannot possess the spirit of freedom and holiness. Their principles and positions in political matters are a great hindrance to their spiritual advancement. These are a constant snare to them and a reproach to our faith. And those who retain these principles will eventually be brought just where the enemy would be glad to have them, where they will be finally separated from who? The movement. These brethren cannot receive the approval of God while they lack sympathy for the oppressed coloured race and are at variance with the pure Republican principles of our government. God has no more sympathy with rebellion upon earth than with the rebellion in heaven. How did he stand on the South in the Civil War? It's a repeat of the rebellion in heaven. What's our test? What's challenging us from 2014 to 2019? What challenged us in 2016 and we failed? Our political views. The problem is we have been on this side of the issue. And when it came to 2016, because we're on this side of the issue, we didn't want Clinton either. And whether we like it or not, the issues are conspiracy theories, racism, and sexism. And what is this? Who's all this coming through? The only way to stand on the right side of this issue, externally and internally, is to accept there are only two streams of information as stated in 1996 in the Time of the End magazine. Whether you want an external source, Time magazine, the New York Times, the Washington Post, they will tell you all about Project Blitz. They'll put you on the right side of the issue. Internally and externally. If we do not correct our political sentiments that are at variance with the law of God and the history that we're in, when we're in a history when the light has been abundantly given, we will fail the test. The only way to pass it is to correct our political views, and the only way to do that is from a true stream of information. If you kneel with me, we'll close in prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for our blessings. Thank you, Lord, that you do allow us to see the history that we're in. Thank you, Lord, that the Levites and the Nethinims, our friends and our family, Lord, that are in the Adventist church or are out in the world in whatever form, religion, atheism that looks like, that you love them just as much as you love them, that you love us, that you also give them a message and a hope that they can make right decisions. I pray for them, Lord. You know that there's dear ones to us that we want to see saved. I pray, Lord, that we will not be a stumbling block to them with our conspiracy theories or our racism or our sexist beliefs, that we won't have wrong political sentiments that carry through. Father, it cannot happen. And I pray that this is corrected in time, that we can have a pure message, that we can understand the sins of Babylon as it is in our history, that we can have a clear picture of them that can be presented to the world, that they can be warned in time. I pray that you bless the rest of our Sabbath day, the food that we're about to eat. Thank you for the hands that have prepared it. Thank you, Lord, for those that have worked so hard to bring these meetings together. Lord, and many jobs go unnoticed or in the shadows. And I pray, Lord, that we'll have gratitude for the hard work that's been done, that we can come together and have our needs met, Lord, while we study these things out. I put all things into your hands and pray in Jesus' name. Amen.